an architecture media podcast supported by the Australian Institute of Architects, produced on Boonwurrung country.
Welcome to Design Speaks Weekly, a podcast that explores the biggest stories in Australian architecture and design. I'm your host, Georgia Burks, and today, Emily Wong, editor of Landscape Architecture Australia, speaks with renowned Icelandic-Danish artist Olafur Eliasson about the tensions between the natural and man-made world and how we can be better instigators of change in the context of the climate crisis. But first, here's the latest news headlines from Architecture AU.
In the news this week, a vision for a $1.5 billion project in Sydney's Five Dock, designed by Koichi Takada Architects, has been unveiled. The proposal, which is yet to be submitted for planning approval, includes 750 apartments and 10,000 square metres of retail space. And Australia's Workplace Gender Equity Agency has released its 2024-2025 gender pay gap data for 10,500 businesses, including 30 architecture and landscape architecture firms. The data shows positive trends across the architectural sector, with 96% of firms working to address their gender pay gaps after conducting an analysis. And finally, Melbourne Design Week returns this May for its 10th edition, featuring over 400 events. Highlights include a talk by interior designer Mary Featherston, reflecting on the legacy of her mid-century collaborations, and a keynote presentation by US architect Tom Kundig on his design approach. Those are the headlines for this week. For the full stories and more news, visit architectureau.com. I'm Adair Winder. It's Tuesday, March 10.
Olafur Eliasson is best known for his large-scale immersive installations that harness ephemeral materials including light, air and water to explore time, the natural environment and climate change. For today's episode, Landscape Architecture Australia editor Emily Wong sat down with Olafur at the opening of his latest exhibition, Presence, at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, which is on show until the 12th of July 2026. They talk about nature and cities, how we can be co-producers of our urban environments, and how we can better care for the world around us.
Olafur, we're here at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, where your exhibition Presence is currently on show. And so Presence is the title of the show, but also the name of a major new work that you're presenting as part of the exhibition. So I'm really curious to hear from you. What does presence mean? And I think it's about more than just physically being here.
Yes, I like, first of all, to acknowledge that the fact that the show is called Presence. Think of a poster down at some bus stop in the city, and it just says presence. And that little conundrum of people saying, well, why does it say presence? Who is present to who, and what is present in this case? Of course, the first thing is presence means being present to something, being someone, being present to you. But presence is also something we think about when we are actually really present, like seriously present. What does that mean? I think that means that you are not faking yourself. You're not in an illusion. You're not sort of trying to make up some version of yourself. You're not behind your social mask. You have taken down your defensiveness and now you are present. It's not necessarily easy, because I understand that. I know it for myself. Sometimes I put up my social mask. I'm very defensive. I protect myself because it's just too much of everything. I read the paper, I look at the news, and I go like, oh my, something, right? So presence is, I think, that moment of exhale, I kind of letting go, lowering your defensiveness, maybe also lowering your attachment to outcome, and then stay there for a second. What happens there? That's a moment of vulnerability, and that is not bad. Yes, vulnerable, I get that, but maybe we can be fiercely vulnerable. Maybe we can be in that place and say, I claim the right to be vulnerable, and I am tired of that meaning me being weak. I want to be vulnerable, and that is my strength.
So I might come back to that a little bit later, but Olafur, I've been thinking that you're really well known as an artist, but a lot of what you do could actually be called design, and in some cases architecture. Do you think of yourself as a designer, and do these kinds of categories or professional labels matter?
No, they don't think. I speak a language, and the language I think, is one thing, but what you say with the language is actually most important. What I do is primarily work with a kind of embodied language, so it's not like Italian or French or science or politics. It's a language of space and time. And that is, of course, not dissimilar to what architects does, unless it's like very commercial, or design in some sense, or fashion, or this or that. So I speak a language which one could say is rooted in the cultural, embodied part of the cultural sector. And I'm happy with the relativity of the labeling. I'm an artist, and that's very clear for me. But if it is in any way optimizing the potential of what I'm trying to say, to call it architecture, just call it architecture is fine. No need for policing there.
So I think the idea of bringing nature into cities is a pretty strong recurring theme for you. And I'm thinking of works like The Waterfalls, Weather Project, your work Beauty, and also Riverbed. And I think all of these particular works let visitors experience natural phenomena that are pretty difficult to access in today's urban environments. So what do you think we are missing? What kind of values from the natural world are we missing in our cities today?
Well, our cities, of course, mainly clusters of people brought together in many, many kinds of boxes. And then there's a recreational potential. Then there's all the highways zigzagging everything and roads and shopping malls. Now, if we look at a city, we would normally say something about public space. But is that really what the city is nurturing fully? I mean, we have a private sector really strong because that's all the money. And the private sector seems to be grabbing what the nicest bits and parts of the city is. And then if we are lucky, there's a bit of politicians who say, hey, hold on a minute, let's protect something called it public space. So public space is the space where the city holds itself accountable to the values that it claims to have. Public space is the space we own together because we pay tax, and we hope that the public space is not immediately constantly privatized by all kinds of private interests, right? Power structures of various kinds. So what I would like to think of a healthy city to be like, I'm not against the private sector altogether, and I'm not against, politicians and all of that. No, but what I am looking for is, where are the public spaces where we feel safe? Where are the public spaces where we actually can be held accountable to our own values? Because sometimes we design public spaces that represents values that are 50 years old. Neoclassicistic, strange stuff that is about monumentalism and not about inclusion and democracy the way we would think of it. Where's the softness, the tenderness, the inclusion? And where is the spaces where we see our own values reflected in spatial language? So the reason why I bring nature into this is not really only just because of nature, but it is because nature holds temporality, often time, ephemerality, the dematerialization of the objecthood that is so, should I say, driven by the quantifiability. I want less quantifiability and more ephemera to guide our spatial language, and that I find a more hospitable way of treating public space.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I'm a landscape architect, and so I think, this idea of bringing more temporality or seasonality and a sense of change, all these things back into cities, I think these things are very much in a way connected to what it means to be human, to have this sense of rhythms and of cycles. But I also think that what's so interesting about your work is really how your installations draw attention to the question of what nature actually is in this age or in these times. Nature in your installations, it's very much constructed, and your work really draws attention to this idea that nature is no longer untouched or separate from us, but actually that nature, it's actually been humanized. I'd like to talk more about these ideas around how we can make public space. And I think that these ideas are actually related quite strongly to other ideas about collectivity, about community and co-participation that come through quite strongly, I think, in a lot of your other works. And, admittedly, sometimes it's more in the foreground, other times it's more of an undercurrent. But in particular, the work I'm thinking of is the Cubic Structural Evolution project, which is downstairs here at the gallery. There's an enormous heap of white Lego bricks, and people, adults, children, anyone can come to the gallery and build their own visions of what the city could be like. So are these works of yours a critique of, or do you see them as a kind of rebellion against the ways that our cities and environments are predominantly being governed?
I think rebelling and, the kind of polarized nature of critique and opposition and so on, I'm trying to come up with a way of acknowledging the need for seeing a conflict as a potential and as a listening opportunity to come together. There is, I think, enough polarization happening across the spectrum from left to right and east to up and down and in and out. So what I'm hoping to ask for is, how do we actually give a mandate to people we don't normally listen to? How do we say to someone we don't feel much overlap with that the person is a valid participant? How do we, instead of asking people in a museum, how do we prevent them feeling like consumer, but to make them a co-producer, a stakeholder? That's what I mean. The mandate of sitting down with a cubic structured evolution table is about, I can build my city too. I'm a part of it. I'm not on the outside. I'm not demonized, marginalized, and on the periphery of things. No, I want to find out, where are the spaces, where are the institutions, where are the systems where I am actually being seen as an important co-producer. That's, of course, where culture, I think, comes into the place, because there's so many spaces where I, tend to end up thinking, well, maybe I'm not good enough. This is only for smart people. And this is not, I don't look this beautiful. I don't fit on Instagram. I'm not this, I'm not skinny enough. So we have a society where normative definition of success is so narrow. Just to even be bloody normal is so hard, because it has become a championship in normality, that people who are just like slightly a little bit off something, then they are immediately start self-shaming. And then we have a negative spiral where the city seems to promote the kind of success image, which we call brand, and its own people. It forgets that they are actually belong to. They are the city. This is a discussion I think is also, it's a soft discussion that is not about coming up with hard conclusions and solutions, but it is very much about connectivity.
Okay, so I think you're saying that it's very much about the process of city building and about letting, the multitude of different people with, various perspectives, sometimes in concert, sometimes in conflict, but being able to make a space for those to be taken into account and also heard.
Normally you will say, is it the journey or is it the destination? No, it is the company, the people you're with. It's not the journey only, it's not the destination. It is the degree to which you succeed actually spending time with other people.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can forget about in the built environment professions, where the emphasis can sometimes be really focused on output and product. Olafur, a lot of your work is about making visible or tangible the impacts of climate change. And for instance, I'm thinking of your photographic series that documents the melting of glaciers in Iceland, I think over a couple of decades. And so I wanted to talk more directly about the challenges we are facing with climate change. I think it's obvious that we're living in times that need us to adapt to the state of the world, and you're known as an advocate for climate change action. So what responsibility do you think creative practitioners have to engage contemporary issues? Do they need to be advocates or even activists?
I think this is a good question. I think everyone should simply do what they can do by looking down and around. Look underneath your feet, because there's a tendency to look out at the horizon somewhere in the future and say, I'm going to become this and this champion and so on. Right now and here, right now, underneath your feet, as I see it, the earth is collapsing right now. And there is a number of smaller things right next to your right hand and your left hand that you can do. If you don't feel like you want to be a leader or champion or whatever, then support somebody who wants, support somebody who does something important. There is so much we can do without necessarily getting all sort of, busy with things that we also don't have the resources for. It's not easy. So as to creative practitioners, I think they are not in any other responsibility than anybody else. And we keep calling out, me being a creative practitioner, calling out the corporate companies for not being good enough. So I should start by sweeping in front of my own door. So since the COP in Paris and even before that, we have tried to lower our carbon emission following a curve that is the one curve that we are all, I believe, to the best of our skills trying to follow. We change the way I do a show, the way we ship works, the way that we choose environmental partners, the way we contract in projects that we want to use the most environmentally friendly materials, the most environmentally friendly transport, the most environmentally friendly hotels that we book into. There's so much you can do just by simply asking to have the values that you can read about in every paper every day. So yes, I think we all have a responsibility. I also think that we are all in the need of facing a degree of trauma and anxiety and climate anxiety. And I don't blame some people from freaking out, because it is freaking scary. And also, I find it honorable when some people go out and they say to this financial institution or this sort of corporate company, I am going to resist a revolution. I'm going to smash you. Because apartheid would never ended unless there would have been some social unrest. And I can see young people being impatient with the way things are going now. And I want to just acknowledge that there is no one on the outside of the discussion we're having now about the environment. Everyone is doing the best they can. And when they see that there's a little bit more they can do, I welcome that.
And I think, addressing climate change is something that very much needs to be tackled at different scales and also collectively across different disciplines. And we certainly need to be thinking about it in many different ways as possible, from the way that we make personal choices in the domestic realm all the way through to the way that we operate and run our professional practices. But, continuing this conversation about impact, I think there was a project you worked on some years ago where you developed a solar LED lamp with the aim of providing clean, affordable light to communities that are currently living without electricity. And I think that was with engineer Frederick Alderson. So I think this project in particular was one of the ones I was thinking about when I asked you early on about whether it was useful to label something either art or design or even architecture. Because I think, arguably projects like this one, and I think it was called Little Sun, have a different kind of impact to large-scale installation work, such as the pieces that you have in galleries or in public space. And so I was curious whether you are interested in sort of going down this path further, the kind of Little Sun path. Is this an approach that you're interested in exploring more in the future?
I think it's two different things. The Little Sun project was about a pragmatic, realistic solution, because suddenly the price of solar panels, photovoltaic crystalline panels, they became cheaper than fossil fuel. And that was across the spectrum. So suddenly it was, because I happened to know a solar engineer, suddenly he said, listen, now you can compete against the fossil fuel. The single wick petroleum or sort of what is it called, kerosene lantern, that would also cause a lot of respiratory and ocular diseases. So that was a kind of was an easy thing to do. It wasn't easy, to be honest, but it was something that was not too hard to do. And then something else is art. Art works in a different way. Art is a completely different thing. What was interesting was the cross-pollination, because I said that little bit of a handheld solar-powered torch. I said, that's a little bit of power in your hand. It's a little empowering machine. It's a work of art. And you know how it is. Sometimes I was, I met a woman who was illuminating a house with petroleum. And I said, this is a work of art. Oh my God, now I get it. Yes, it is. It's fantastic. It's solar panel. So we shouldn't underestimate sometimes the labeling can be cross-pollinating. And in the art world, I could also say, well, this is a functioning solution to economical change of a person or a family who has a limited amount of resources, and the solar panel is going to save them enough money for them to work less and study instead.
So this is obviously really impactful work that you're doing in this area. And I do think it's a pretty strong demonstration of a phrase or a concept that you've spoken about on previous occasions. And that's about the idea of holding space for the future. And I do think that means allowing or enabling the possibility of a better future or better futures, which I think is exactly what your Little Sun project has been achieving. And I think that brings me to my final question, which is, how, in a broader sense, do we actually do this? How do we hold space for the future?
I mean, we all wonder, right? What about the future? And it's not easy. I sometimes simply sit down and I write myself a letter from myself 20 years from now. And I give myself advice what I should have done in case I hadn't done it. And this is actually quite funny. And in the beginning, I actually sent the letter. That was too silly, didn't really work. But it's a nice idea to actually hold yourself accountable, not to what you have done, but what you have not done. And that actually led to kind of, speeding up some of the changes in the studio. Well, why wait in my studio? I have 100 people. There's a lot of things we can do with regards to how we cook, how we waste manage, how we pack the artworks, what company is paying for you, where does the heat come from, and the electricity. So holding yourself accountable is such a strange thing, because you have to be quite disciplined. Also, it's uncomfortable. it's like takes a long time to learn about things and so on and so forth. So I don't want to demonize the people who are struggling to find the energy and resources to actually adapt to climate solutions. I blame the politicians for not telling and assisting people or the companies to not make it easier for us to shift into greener solutions. Now, that is the issue. People are doing as good as they can, and I'm tired of bashing people for not being good enough when the companies who are supposed to be guiding are not even doing the work.
Olafur, thanks so much for speaking with me today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode, which is supported by the Australian Institute of Architects. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a rating. I'm Georgia Burks, and this has been Design Speaks Weekly. Design Speaks Weekly is produced on Boonwurrung country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture.